You're a horror fanatic living in present times and generally satisfied watching your movies in some giant Coliseum-sized theater. But some part of you always wanted to know what the movie watching experience would be like in a theater in the 1950s. Well, hold on to your nips and your nuts because I have a time portal that will take you directly to that magical decade and all its pop culture glory. You're standing in the middle of a deserted street in a small town in a Midwestern part of the country. Down half a block on the right, just past Mr. Johnson's soda fountain, is the local movie theater. The shutter blinds on the box office window slowly opens, and the lights in the lobby flicker on just as the smell of hot buttered popcorn swirls its way down the street right to your nostrils. As you walk closer, you see the marquee has hundreds, no thousands of horror movie titles listed on it. You walk up to the box office, and there's a ticket sitting there. It says admit one, and you grab it just before a small gust of wind hits your back. You hear a slight creak as the door to the house opens. Grabbing your popcorn and Coke, you walk into the darkness and settle yourself down into a red, overstuffed, plush chair and fix your eyes on the screen. The projector kicks in with a rattle. The screen lights up. You're about to see every horror movie that ever came out in the 1950s. Consider this your crash course. So just to preface a little, the 1940s saw the gradual fade out of the classic Universal monsters. Though it remained littered with Karloff Lugosi vehicles throughout much of the decade, their reign of box office terror slowly waned as a new generation of horror fans began viewing their iconic characters as a little more than comic relief, especially after the release of such movies as Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Zombie movies and creature features began to surface, along with the obligatory House of Horrors movies. And though many of these films were fantastic, much of them were still being shot in black and white, which ingrained them with a kind of art house movie quality, which only the 1940s could provide. Horror needed to explode into Technicolor permanently, and though black and white movies peppered the movie landscape right up until the early 70s, it was definitely shoved into the back seat as horror fans wanted to see the actual color of blood when they went to a movie. Enter the 1950s and beautiful full-color widescreen VistaVision. People, they wanted bigger, scarier, freakier monsters, and the 1950s delivered on that. Monsters, creatures, and things were coming at you from all angles, from the sea, from space, from beyond. Many were low-budget, hokey-looking, and cheap costumes that looked like they were just thrown together at the last minute for a Halloween party. But goddamn, they were good. There were no slow burners. They grabbed you right at the start. Nobody in the audience gave a shit about character development. They wanted the setting, the monster, the hero, and the final fight. Then off to Mr. Johnson's soda fountain afterwards to talk about how kick-ass it was. The 1950s were so diverse. It wasn't just about low-budget creature features and weird things coming from space. Japan got into the game as well with the creation of perhaps one of the greatest icons in the monsterverse, Godzilla. And from the 1950s up to present, you name him, he's fought him. King Kong, Mothra, the Smog Monster, Astro Monster, Megalon. Jesus, the list goes on and on. The creative mandate was basically this. Think of some creature, no matter how weird or utterly unrealistic it might be, put him on a crash course with Tokyo, and as sure as that morning shit, Godzilla would rise from the ocean, wade ashore, and start the clock on mission fuck 'em up before vanishing back into the ocean. Swimming away from Japan and Godzilla, we'll head to the land of good manners and a small British production company called Hammer Films. They'd been kicking around since around the mid-30s, doing comedies, dramas, crime films, and a smattering of other genres, but turned its focus to horror movies in the late 50s with the release of their versions of Frankenstein and Dracula. They were definitely taking a gamble and rebooting characters from a bygone era. When everyone else was making movies about one-eyed alien monsters from Neptune, these guys were going back to the pioneers for inspiration. And holy shit did that gamble ever pay off. These movies are considered among the higher echelon, and though not everyone reviewed them with glowing words at the time, they were box office successes and have been retroactively kind of appraised with much higher regard and hailed as influences on many of the directors in the years that followed. Moving on, this tour through 50s land would be left dangling like a dead dick if I didn't talk about the genius that is Roger Corman. From 1955 to 1965, he put out movies at an absolutely staggering pace, like every 60 to 100 days if you averaged it out. He did everything: westerns, adventure, action, exploitation. But those of us will remember him most for his contribution to horror and his collaborations with Vincent Price, many of them film adaptations of old Edgar Allan Poe stories. I feel like this video could just go on forever because there are so many innovations and variations to not just horror, but cinema in general. It was the golden age of 3D movies, with films like It Came from Outer Space, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and its sequel, Revenge of the Creature, held audiences spellbound. Unfortunately, the novelty of 3D wore off pretty fast, and the format, though emerging from time to time, lay more or less dormant until a revival in the early 1980s, when a new generation of horror fans got to experience what their parents had waxed nostalgic about, when movies and the Jaws, Friday the 13th, and Amityville franchises all gave their respective Part 3 sequels the 3D treatment. The 1950s were full of novelties beyond 3D. Filmmakers like William Castle wanted to turn his films not just into a night out at the movies, but add the immersive elements that turned a simple movie viewing into an event. In some movies, you were handed life insurance certificates informing you that you were covered if you died of fright. Others had this chicken out kind of card where the movie would pause for intermission, and anyone too scared to continue could present this card to a designated area and get a full refund. You'd have skeletons fly across the theaters, chairs equipped to vibrate at certain points of a film, special viewing cards that would reveal the existence of ghosts in movies. He's probably second only to Corman for his ability to pump out movies like he was operating a license plate press, and his place in horror as an innovator definitely put him in that Hall of Fame. I swear, there are things I'm missing on this little tour through time. I could dedicate a passage of this to filmmakers like Ed Wood. Even with his dedicated cult followers, I would consider that kind of scraping the side of the peanut butter jar where the toast guts end up. So there you have it. With the magic of time travel, you've been able to watch every horror movie made in the 1950s, from smell-o-vision to 3D, shot in brilliant cinescope and stereophonic sound. It's an experience that even your giant modern 1,000-seat theater with reclining chairs just couldn't come close to matching. And I know this because I've been to the future, and so far, not one single nostalgia buff has made a spotlight video on how cool it was to sit in some huge theater where the people around you wouldn't shut the hell up, and the moron in front of you won't put his cell phone away, and the hot dog and Coke you bought costed you $28. Some eras are just meant to be the coolest forever. Thank you for watching. I appreciate the continued support for my growing channel. You can check out my short form videos on TikTok and drop me a line and say hi. As always, I will see you at the next slaughtering.